From Hollywood, it's Out of My Mind. I'm Jay Douglas, and in episode 18, we're going to tackle both ends of public speaking, from overcoming fear to voicing confidence when you get up to speak. It's another Out of My Mind short story with psychologist Peter Desberg and broadcast voice coach Dr. Ann Utterback. It's all designed to satisfy the curiosity of baby boomers like you who are relentlessly curious about everything. If you're not a baby boomer, you can still listen to the program. All you have to do is improve your voice by repeating bom pa pa bom pa bom pa bom bom pa pa bom pa pa bom fa dang a dang dang fa ding a dong ding until you become hoarse or someone throws you out of the house, whichever comes first. There's a blue moon rising as episode 18 of Out of My Mind begins with speech, speech. I first posted these two stories a couple of weeks apart. Because they're so closely related, I always thought that if I had the chance to do it over, I would have run them in the same episode. Well, I do, so I will. First, psychologist and stage fright expert Peter Desberg will help you overcome your fear of public speaking. Then Ann Utterback, PhD, will make sure your voice projects your newfound confidence when you step behind the lectern. Congratulations! Your neighbor urged you to run for the condominium board and you won. Even better, now you have to make a speech.
Fear of public speaking is the #1 fear in America. Number 5 is fear of dying.
Peter Desberg is a practicing psychologist. He's also a former psychology professor and an expert on stage fright. You probably don't need to be reminded, but because you can talk to a stranger in a checkout line or work the room at a party, that doesn't mean you can speak in front of an audience.
And the reason is the expectations that are set. It's like you're up there as an expert, you've had time to prepare, so you should be saying something with very high expectations. This should be entertaining, this should be interesting, this should be informative, this should be an expert talking. That puts a lot of pressure on.
Relax. Peter's going to get you through this. Public speaking takes a little practice. Okay, it takes a lot of practice. And you can't weasel your way out of it.
People sometimes say, if I practice something too much, won't it become stale? And the absolute opposite happens. When you're there under pressure trying to remember what happens next and where you go next, it's going to put a lot of pressure on you. If you know everything coming up, you can take advantage of anything that happens in the room. A door slams, a baby cries, it doesn't matter. You're there, you're set. I find it really helpful to have people call you when you know you're going to be practicing, have people walking by knock on the door, set your iPhone alarm to go off at random times, just so you're used to hearing it and going on, so you don't get stopped. You want to practice as much under performance conditions as possible. So for instance, some people consider practice, I'll take my talk and I'll read it over. That's not practice. You have to say it. And if you know you're going to be in a room with 20 people, and you're going to have to kind of raise your voice to reach the ones at the end, you don't sit in your bedroom and say, okay, thank you all for being here. You have to practice like this and say, hello, thank you for being here. If you know that you want your notes in front of you on a table, have practice in front of something where you can have your notes and glance down at them. What you want to do is, as closely as possible, approximate how you're going to be performing.
All the practice in the world won't do any good if you obsess over other people's actions. You can't control whether anyone will even like your talk, let alone whether they'll vote your way in an election or do business with your new company.
But I can control how I prepare. I can control how I practice. I can control how I simulate the situation. So that's all I can do. But that's a lot.
You're ready to knock 'em dead with your speech. But when you open your mouth to practice, let's just say your age is showing.
Everything becomes a little bit tougher to articulate well.
Ann Utterback, PhD, is a broadcast voice specialist, stress reduction counselor, and a regular writer on solving voice problems.
You also might find in restaurants that you're not heard quite as well by the waiter or by your partner across the table.
I can relate to that, or at least my wife says I should. The same problems that affect other parts of your body, a little arthritis in the joints, the flabby muscles where your biceps used to be, play a role in voice problems such as a softer voice and slower speech.
Your lungs and your muscles that control breathing are getting a little weaker.
And believe it or not, the joints around your vocal folds, what we commonly call the vocal cords, are tightening up.
Arthritis or the calcification makes those joints a little less flexible, and that affects how they open and close.
According to Dr. Utterback, we don't have to take this silently. Let's start with articulation. For many of us, we have to slow down to form even familiar words crisply.
If you say a sentence, for instance, like West Grand Junction will be hot instead of mild next week, and you really explode those ending TD, PB, KG sounds, exaggerate them, really make a big explosion of air, that'll train your tongue to get quicker at making those sounds.
As for making your voice heard even in noisy environments, you've got to put some power behind your words. And that means no more of what Dr. Utterback calls socialized breathing.
For instance, to increase your breathing, one of my favorite exercises is just to put your hand on your stomach and try to breathe so that your abdomen goes out when you inhale and it comes in when you exhale. If you have trouble doing that or getting that sense of that, you can just lie down on your bed or on the floor, because when we're in a prone position, we always breathe with our diaphragm, which is the way we're meant to breathe. But when we breathe in our upper chest, it's what I call socialized breathing. We've been taught to hold in our stomach and, breathe up in our chest. But if you breathe with your abdomen and you take a good inhalation in and then just exhale an ah sound at a regular conversational rate, and see how many seconds you can exhale that ah. You should shoot for like 24 seconds. If the first time you do it, you can only go ah for 10 seconds, try to add a second a day until you can get up to 24 seconds.
Ann Utterback, Ph.D., is a broadcast voice specialist, stress reduction counselor, and author. She has more advice on working with your voice on her website and in her book on protecting your voice. I'll put links to both of those in the show notes. Peter Desberg is a practicing psychologist, a professor emeritus of psychology at California State University, Dominguez Hills, and the author of 4 books on stage fright. I'll put links to his books in the show notes as well. You can read the show notes by going to outofmymindpodcast.com, clicking on episode 18, and following the link to show notes. If you're listening on YouTube, click on the Read the Show Notes banner that will appear in a moment. Also on YouTube are 2 episode extras. One is from Dr. Utterback, and it's an exercise you can use to learn to project your voice. The other is from Peter Desberg, and it's more tips for overcoming your public speaking fear. Go to Out of My Mind Podcast on YouTube.com, click on Playlists, and then on Extras. And that will end the speech making for episode 18 of Out of My Mind. We'll bring you these short stories every week from now until the end of 2015. In episode 19, we'll update our story about Jessica Cameron, the actress and independent filmmaker who found that acting in horror films helped her to overcome her fear of, let's just say, they're little critters one often finds in horror films. That's next Saturday at 8 a.m. Eastern, and I'm looking forward to talking with you then. I'm Jay Douglas. Out of My Mind is produced by Penny Summers and is a production of the Theater of Your Mind Incorporated, Hollywood, California.